Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Scott Parker from Business Disability International, and I've been asked to talk today about what I call the new disability business case, because I think everyone who wants to enable people with disabilities into jobs and careers and to be respected and valued as customers will actually want to find a new approach. Because, of course, the way we traditionally communicate to business clearly hasn't been as effective as it should be. So I'm going to take you through a few slides. And just by way of introduction, I suppose I should add that I set up the first business disability network, the one in the UK, way back in the early 90s. Since then, I've helped business disability networks to get off the ground from Australia to Austria to Sri Lanka, and have worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of business leaders, all of whom are looking for a better way to actually manage and position disability as a business and ethical priority. So we have to change the way we communicate with business. And the slides I'm going to take you through capture, to the best of my ability, some of the latest thinking in terms of how we reposition disability so that we can open new conversations with business, which encourage them to move in the direction that I know we all want to see them go. So, first of all, what do we call it? Not the business case for disability. We call it the business and ethical rationale for the corporate best practice that I branded Disability Confidence way back in 2003. This is an important first statement because all too often we still hear, in effect, the business case for hiring disabled people. Well, you wouldn't argue the business case for hiring Canadians. I mean, I've done a little video which actually explores the fact that there are only about 38 million Canadians compared to 1.3 billion people with disabilities. But if you started to argue, is there a business case for hiring Canadians? People would say, well, but why would you even ask? Some of them can do the job, some can't, some need adjustments, some don't. Well, why are we still generalizing about 1.3 billion people with disabilities? And those old arguments that in effect are grounded in they're not as sick as you think haven't worked. Not since we first started to put out the statistics from the DuPont surveys in the 70s, showing that disabled individuals in work were as productive or more, were as safe or more, was reliable. Those kind of generalizations have not convinced business as a sector to engage in a new and positive way with us on this. So actually what I've learned is that the real business and ethical case for engaging differently on this issue is because you get the best practice that then enables you to be a better employer, a better service provider, and I branded that best practice Disability Confidence. Next. I always start, of course, by the positive message that business is investing in learning how to deliver best practice. Often the first message that the employer hears is they're all unemployed. And of course, for many individuals in business and their families and their friends, there's kind of an assumption, well, yes, I guess they are, but there's nothing I can do about that. So I don't start there. I start with enlightened business leaders are investing in learning how to do this better. So the 500 multinationals that have signed up to the Valuable 500, for example, you can go on that website as an employer and click on some of the brands that will be your customers, your partners, your clients, your competitors, and actually get a feeling that there's something going on out there. Serious business players are starting to think differently. And of course, we have the ILO's Global Business Disability Network, which enables business-to-business learning and best practice through a global network affiliated to national business disability networks in more than 30 countries. Again, the message being, this is now increasingly something that is being owned by business. And that this, of course, is learning the best practice that enables the business to thrive, delivering the business improvements that also benefit people with disabilities. Next. So I start with the logos of the companies that are publicly committed to doing better on this business challenge, if you like. So the message is not that these companies are all exemplars, that they've solved everything they have to solve in terms of being barrier-free and adapting for people with disabilities. The message to the employers that we're trying to influence is, you're not going to be the first one. You're not alone. If you're trying to say to your board, why don't we engage differently on this? Look at the companies that have already started down this road. Next. The next challenge, of course, is to help them to understand what success looks like. What is it that we really want them to do? All too often, the message they hear is, you have to be sensitized or aware. So what do they do with that? How do they translate being aware into the kind of activity that removes barriers for groups of people with similar access needs, that adapts for individuals, that actually enables the company to adapt for human reality, if you like? So I defined a disability confident company. It understands how disability and its own corporate disability performance affects every aspect of the business. Hugely important in a world that somehow thinks it's HR who own this, when actually every part of the business has to up its game. It removes barriers for groups of people with similar disabilities, similar access needs. This is the accessibility line that all too often is assumed to mean ramps, or perhaps accessible websites. And somehow it's assumed to be all that's needed. But actually, disability equality requires this interaction between removing barriers for groups and expertly making adjustments for individuals so that they can contribute. This is the workplace adjustment or accommodation line, where we give people the tools and flexibility that they need. Ideally, we give all our employees the tools and flexibility they need in order to do their best at work. And the final component of a disability confident company is it doesn't make assumptions about human potential on the basis of a label, particularly this disability label. Now, those four elements add up to, in effect, the principles that underpin the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which actually, as you know, I'm sure, doesn't apply to the private sector directly. But if they do this, then most of the basic principles that are enshrined in the CRPD in terms of making accommodations and disability equality can be brought to life in the organization. The little graphic thing I got there, the benefits of best practice. Please hear me say it's not the benefit of hiring disabled people. It's the benefit of learning how to recruit everyone on the basis of capability, and the benefit of knowing how to deliver the business improvements which enhance productivity because you've given everyone the tools they need. So you quickly sketch out with them. Of course, they minimize legal risk, but legal compliance messages aren't that powerful. We'll talk about that later. Of course, you get the professional benefit for the managers who learn how to be better managers of everyone because they focus on skills, not assumptions. You get the strategic benefits to the business as they enhance productivity, brand reputation, whatever. And of course, they're benefiting society and people with disabilities at the same time. And I stress the need for the ethical component of this business case. You say to the business community, a business case which suggests that you'll only treat disabled people properly if there's money in it for you, and we can prove that there's enough of them to warrant you treating them properly. No, there's an ethical obligation there as well to treat all people with disabilities, indeed you could argue everyone, with due respect and consideration for their human rights. Next. Why invest in improving your disability performance? Now, this again is about best practice. So the typical message I'm afraid we still hear is captured by someone recently saying to me, visually impaired people are more loyal. And I had to say, than deaf people, than wheelchair users? I mean, again, it's that tendency to try to generalize about people as individuals, which just doesn't work. Because of course, the employer you're talking to has probably met a disabled person who was not more loyal. And you wouldn't dream of saying that about someone from an ethnic minority or a woman. So come back. So what we're saying here is that if you learn how to recruit people on the basis of capability and not assumptions, you get talented and engaged people. If your products are designed with inclusive design principles in mind, well, you get innovative products, you get happier customers, you get stronger relationships with community agencies if you're seen as a thought leader to be investing as an ally in enabling everyone to actually get the skills and certifications that they require to thrive in the labor market. You get higher productivity and reduce costs if you make adjustments quickly so that people with disabilities could stay with you. You cut turnover in that regard, and of course, so that you reduce sickness absence. The point here is these are the benefits of disability know-how, of disability expertise. This is not the benefit of hiring disabled people. Hiring a disabled person does not instantly make you have outstanding customer relationships. Nobody would say that for a second. It's just that that somehow is a thread that seems to run through the old-fashioned messaging. Next. I think too, for those of us who are interested in economic empowerment of people with disabilities, we miss a trick when we're talking to business and we don't acknowledge they do care about their customers. When we don't acknowledge that actually removing obstacles for customers makes it easier often to recruit. There's a classic long ago story in the UK about a retailer who trained 25,000 front of house staff in how to welcome customers with disabilities, including how to welcome deaf customers. HR reported a few months later that they were starting to get really good applicants from the deaf community because the message got out that if you value me as a customer, you might even welcome me as a colleague. And because when they did come in for interviews and work experience and started to join the organization, they were working with people on the front of house who had basic deaf awareness, knew not to turn their back on someone who was lip reading, for example. And of course, how do you capture the attention of a senior business leader as you understand their reality, their world, and their world is one in which customers matter. And so I did this profile extrapolating from UK stats. Of course, it's not accurate to any percentile point or anything, but it's to give this particular large corporation in India a feeling for why he should remove obstacles that were linked to preventing customers from coming in the door because of their mobility impairment, or requiring everybody to make a phone call to get a job interview and not understanding that actually if 197 million of their customers are deaf, well, that's probably a lot of deaf and hard of hearing potential job seekers. That if they're removing obstacles for customers with visual impairment, they might be removing obstacles that make it easier for job seekers with visual impairment. But the real point of this is to say disability has an impact on your business, even if you don't realize it, because I bet you, Mr. Business Person, you had no idea that 1 in 5 of your female customers, of your women customers, are likely to have a disability. I think that may be one of the reasons that L'Oreal is so active with the Global Business Disability Network, because they got that insight and they understood that actually if 1 in 5 women have a disability, many of them have families around them who also then start to think differently about the brands that clearly value their family member who has a disability. Next. So there's a kind of strategic higher level of conversation with some business leaders, trying to get them to see that the world in which they operate is changing, and that any sensible business leader wants to have the intelligence to understand the markets and the worlds in which he's operating. So I would point out that global opinion on what constitutes fair, ethical, equal treatment of people with disabilities is changing fundamentally. And the evidence for that is the UN Convention having been signed, ratified by 181 countries. But from the perspective of the business, because of course the CRPD does not apply to them directly, the point of that to a business leader is that your potential talent, your employees, their families, your consumers are starting to have different expectations as they start to think of this as a human rights issue, something to do with respect and employment law and consumer rights. And so as they're aware of this shift worldwide, expectations of responsible businesses are changing accordingly. And so I put a quote in from the Secretary General then of the UN, just to say that the United Nations is well aware that you cannot deliver the Sustainable Development Goals without addressing the needs and expectations and rights of disabled people. But also I would be pointing out that you now got Valuable 500 every year at Davos, positioning disability equality as part of a global debate about the impact of inequality on humankind. Next. Then I move on in terms of these arguments to saying that actually companies that can anticipate these changing expectations by delivering disability best practice are going to be better at realizing all human potential. Of course, they will minimize legal and operational risks while benefiting from recognition as responsible companies. I want to come back to this legal compliance because all too often in the disability advocacy world, if you like, the messaging is about compliance, compliance, compliance. And unfortunately, a mere legal compliance corporate culture gets in the way when you're trying to actually promote the rights and equality agenda. Because if you think about it, nobody wants to see a business leader, implicitly communicating to everyone who works for them and to their potential talent and their customers, I will only treat you properly if I have to by law. And of course, what we see in far too many employers, including public sector employers, by the way, I have been focusing on business in this conversation so far, but actually the public sector has a lot to learn here too. But you see the expectation throughout an organization that I will only make an adjustment or accommodation for you if you can prove you're disabled enough according to national law. Well, that's what I mean when I say the message that's heard is, I will only treat you properly if I have to, because we only make reasonable accommodations so that we treat people fairly on an equal basis. So coming back then, the opportunity here is to promote the best practice, which drives the business improvement, which in turn enhances the life chances of the world's more than 1.3 billion people with disabilities, and those of us who are going to become disabled in the future. So I would always urge advocates to include in their presentations quotes from business leaders who are admired. Ashok Vaswani was until very recently global head of consumer banking and payments at Barclays, and he's very clear, this is just fundamental. When we get things right for disabled people, we improve life for everybody. And he has led some fantastic work, particularly on welcoming and serving customers with disabilities. But my point here is that the business community needs to see other business leaders supporting the messaging that we want them to really, really pay attention to. That business to business message is hugely powerful. Next. So then we come to statistics. I think the most important thing I can say about statistics, data, if you like, which we're all so keen on, is that I don't think there is any evidence whatsoever that statistics change behavior. We can wander around the world saying 1.3 billion people with disabilities out there over and over to anyone. And what do? It doesn't give them any idea of what they should actually do. However, when we're talking to leaders in the business community who are beginning to want to understand the impact of disability on their business, it's very helpful to give them a sense of what the demographics really look like through a business lens. So not only because then they begin to want to learn more about how they should respond, but because it gives them, if you like, ammunition that they can take back to base when they're talking to their boards or to their senior colleagues to say, well, if 1 in 3 people aged 50 to 64 and we're a healthcare business, that must have a huge impact on our customers. And in fact, GSK, in the early days that we were working with them, discovered, as we encouraged them to do, that 1 in 3 of their patients, of their customers accessing their pharmaceutical products, was either disabled or hoping not to be, disabled or trying not to be. This quickly went right round the business. And suddenly they were looking at everything from, well, the packaging on their products, was it accessible for these customers with disabilities? Could they read it? Could they open it? Right through to, of course, what did it mean for their talent pool? So the point of the facts is to ground the statistics that you use with a particular company in an understanding of their world. So the 1 in 5 women worldwide having a disability had a particular impact when talking to L'Oreal, for example. I'm sure it had a lot to do with the fact that they're such an active member now of the ILO's Global Business Disability Network. And there's another really important message here, which is systems that work for extreme users work better for everyone. So this is saying that if your online banking works easily for people with dyslexia or visually impaired, deaf, have intellectual disabilities, colorblind, et cetera, then it'll be easier for everyone to navigate. And of course, the fact that anyone who reaches 70 years of age is likely to experience at least 10 years of disability, chronic health conditions, is particularly relevant whether you're running a housing association or actually if you're a bank, because of course, what they also discovered in the UK was that 80% of the country's wealth was in the hands of the over 45s. However, my point is, use statistics with care and ground them in the reality of the industrial sector, if you like, that you are working with. Next. There's another thing here too, which is I see a widespread assumption that we're talking about people that the companies don't know, don't employ, that all people with disabilities in effect are unemployed, when actually in any large organization, and I'm convinced almost anywhere in the world, 10 to 12% of the workforce will have a disability. It's just that they don't think of migraines as having a disability. They don't think of their dyslexia as a disability. They don't think. Because of course, in many countries, there's quite a narrow definition, say under quotas, of who is regarded as disabled enough to qualify for government protection in a quota situation. The message that 10% of your workforce has a disability should prompt the business leader to listen quite positively when you say, and so you should be learning directly from your own workforce. What could you do which would make it easier for your disabled colleagues to enhance their careers, enhance their contribution? And 1 in 3 people either has a disability themselves or has someone with a disability in their immediate circle. Now that's a European Union statistic. I think it underestimates this phenomenon. But the reason I would mention it to a business leader is because I'm reassuring him that if he does set out to announce that he wants to do better on disability, he will have an extraordinary groundswell of support for that. People in the company who've been waiting for their business executives to actually acknowledge the need to improve their disability performance. We've also got the fact that people with disabilities worldwide are at least twice as unlikely to be in work, looking for work, economically active. Now, again, we don't want to leave the impression that all disabled people are unemployed, but this is, from the perspective of any business leader, an enormous waste of human potential. And it's an untapped labor pool. These are people that are poised to work, that could work, if only the business were more creative in how it communicated its interest, its willingness to engage with them as talent. And of course, what we're really saying is you need to do a better job as an employer of everyone. By learning how to employ people with disabilities, you become a better employer, a better recruiter of everyone, because this disability expertise enables you to enhance everyone's productivity. So, the classic would be you don't ask someone who says, I need a left-handed mouse. You don't ask them to prove they have a disability. You just give them a left-handed mouse, because what you're doing is you're adapting for human reality.